Hello, everyone, and welcome to this brief presentation brought to you by Snug Harbor. Today, we're going to be discussing how we can prep for bird walks at Snug Harbor and how you can be birding like a pro. So I'm going to give a brief overview of who I am. My name is David Tomac. I am currently a visitor service associate at Snug Harbor. I am an intern for Audubon, New York, and Connecticut. And I currently have 8 research projects that I'm doing simultaneously with a group of students. And I have a very strong passion for animals and wildlife, and I hope to share that with you tonight. So we have 4 topics that we're going to be going through, and the first one is Ebird. So you might be thinking, what is Ebird? Ebird is a worldwide database that many organizations and community science members utilize when recording avian species populations. And you might be wondering, why does this matter? It matters not only to researchers who identify population trends, see the overall health of the overall strength of a population, the health of an ecosystem by looking at keystone species, which are species that are very sensitive to their environment, and therefore any changes to their overall population would be indicative of the health of the ecosystem. And the fact that we're going to be utilizing it in Snug Harbor. It's also great because it gets you to keep track of all your checklists, all of your species that you've seen, and all of the individuals that you've seen. So you could actually see that you've seen, say, 600 individuals since you've began birding, or since you have downloaded this app or logged on and created an account on the Ebird website, which is really cool because you get to see how you grow as a birder. So I'm going to run through Ebird really quickly. So basically, you have your observation date, so when you want birding, and you have your observation type. You have 4 different types of observation types. So you have traveling. So if you've traveled a specific distance, stationary, if you're standing still at a dock, a pier, at your window, on a porch. You could be remembering things from your from previous birding experiences or outings. So that's historical. And then incidental is when it wasn't your primary purpose. Maybe you were driving, gardening, going to a store, coming to Snug Harbor, and you decided, hey, I saw a bunch of these cool birds on the way. I'm going to put it into Ebird, and then you'll choose incidental. And then let's go through each one in a little bit more detail. So this is what pops up if I click traveling. You have your start time, your duration, your distance, your party size, and your checklist comments. So a few things. You're going to notice that there's a trend for all of these for observation types. And you're going to see like some categories are the same for each of those types. I'm also going to bring your attention to the start time. So that's very important because birds are more active in the day than at night, depending on the species. So having that time would be great for researchers to know. So if it's a slow day, they know it might be just later in the day. Or if it's this really crazy, hectic, overwhelming birding day, which does happen, and it's really nice to see because you get to see like 40, 50 species in one day, they're going to know that it's probably earlier in the morning. Then an important thing is your checklist comments. Remember, all this information is going to the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and other researchers in the country and around the world. So we want to be sure to give as much information as possible when they're creating their surveys, studies, and other research projects to keep track of birds. So with that out of the way, here's the stationary breakdown. You just need your start time, duration, party size, and checklist comments. Your historical, where you have to write your start time, your duration, your distance, area, party size, and checklist comments. And this is the longest one that you would have to complete. And then finally, you have incidental, where you just need your start time, party size, and checklist comments. So after you complete all that, you will have to choose which birds you've seen. And you're going to get this really long list of birds. And it's actually broken down, I don't know if you can see, but it's broken down by the types of birds. So you have your waterfowl, you have your grebes, you have your loons, owls, and so on. And I just chose snow goose because that's the first one on the list. And you would write down the amount of birds that you've seen, or place an X, and I'll explain why you would do that in a second. Put all the details from your encounter with this bird, If you have pictures or videos, especially if it's a rare bird, I would suggest putting that into medium, and any informational data. So the age, the gender, the breeding code, and so on. So what do you do when you can't count all the birds in front of you, right? Sometimes you could have 1,000 birds in front of you, especially during migration. All you would do is put an X in that section. Why would you do this, and why not estimate? Or why would you estimate instead of just making up the info? Well, because again, this is going to researchers, right? We want to give them the most accurate information. So this little breakdown tells you what each number value gives them. So 0 bird just says, hey, nothing was present, no species were here. 1 bird says that there was a presence of species. 2 says that there's a pair. 10 says that there's a flock or a group, and over 100 or more, rather, tells you that there's like a ton of birds in that area. It's super prominent in that location, and that's great because that could tell you, especially during migration seasons, that the birds go through that location, and maybe other officials might want to protect that area. And an X, again, just means that there's a presence. So that means it's between 1 and 100 plus birds, but it just tells them that there's a presence. So that's always a safe way of putting in that information if you don't know exactly how many birds are in front of you. And at this point in the video, you could pause the overall recording if you wanted to count how many birds are present. And I will tell you how many there are in a few seconds. So I'm assuming that you've paused the video and you're ready to hear the amount of birds. I'm sure you guys are at the edge of your seats. I counted 39 species. Maybe I'm 1 or 2 off. But an important thing to remember is that no bird in the wild, unless it's sleeping or dead, will ever stay this still. So this is a picture, obviously, because I couldn't find the recording. And also, this is a great training tool. So when you're seeing a lot of these birds, and you can't sit there and count each individual one because they're all moving, trying to look for food, you're going to try to estimate how many birds there are. And there's a lot of different methods. I'm going to go over one today, which is estimating using units of your choice. So, for instance, in this picture, I'll use 10 as a unit because that's a nice number in this situation. So I'll say, hey, there's 10 birds in this area, 15 to 20 birds in the middle column here. And then on this side, I'll say there's another 10. So that would make it between 35 to 40 birds. And that's pretty close to the number here. And if you're a few over, that's okay. But it becomes a problem when you overinflate your totals, because that gives researchers the wrong picture. So you always want to underestimate versus overestimate. So I'm just going to briefly discuss some ecological habits that are great to form, especially if you are a new or old birder, or if you're old to birding. So here is one of the biggest mistakes that I see, even among birders that have been birding for years, and that is they don't write things down. And this might sound silly, but it's super important to write down stuff. So especially if you're going to keep track of where animals are for your own safekeeping or for scientific research, you want to be as accurate as possible. So you may forget what you spotted if you don't write it down. If you're going back after, say, an hour of birding to come home and put everything on Ebird or iNaturalist or whatever websites you wanted to put it on, you want to make sure that you're not giving the wrong info and that you're not overinflating numbers, making up species by accident. You want to be as accurate as possible. Then you might see animals that you're not familiar with, haven't really seen in a while, and you can't remember their name. So you're going to write down the silhouette of the animals. Anything that could help you identify them later, so like field marks, which basically means like the shape and size of the beak, the overall plumage, if you could tell between male and female, what gender is it, and stuff like that. And then you would want to write down the number of species and their behaviors, because that's really important. And then reiterating and echoing the notion of underestimating versus overestimating populations. If you see a bird with the same gender in that location, even if you're, say, 100, 200 feet from where you were previously, the Ebird recommendation is to walk another half mile before counting another bird species. If you're in a super concentrated, like a bird concentrated environment, maybe walk a tenth of a mile, but walk a little bit further than you would normally walk, especially if you just not to see the same bird twice. And then in the top corner, you're going to see another form of estimating, not another form, but another number that they've used to estimate. And you can see that they used the number 25. You could have also used the number 30. You could have used 50 and had slightly bigger circles, but that's another great way of what's called estimating. And regardless how you estimate, as long as you give researchers an idea of the population in front of you without overinflating your numbers, that's the goal. And I have another picture of this on this slide. And the reason we're practicing this so much is because this is one of the hardest things to get right when you go birding. I have experts that I've worked with for years that still can't get it down. And that's perfectly fine. Remember, worst comes to worst, you can always put an X. So let's try this one. You could see that in the first circle right here, there's 100 birds. Then Ebird says, hey, there's another 100 here, another 100 here, and then this might be between 100 to 150. So you might say there's another 100 here, another 100 here, and sorry, another 50 here or 70 here, and that gives you between 450 to 470 birds. And again, as long as it's under 470 or whatever the real total is, it's okay. The second topic that we're going to be talking about today are nests. So how do I look for nests and why is it important to look for nests? So looking for nests around New York City or whatever area you're from is an important way of assessing the breeding and mating habits of birds. And this would show you if the birds are mating, if the birds are breeding and producing offspring, and their overall population trend is increasing. And that's a great thing that everyone wants to happen, right? We want birds to be thriving in their environment. And you'll record it on Nest Watch, which is very similar to Ebird, except you're just keeping track of nests. And I'm going to go over the types of nests that are around New York City or that birds make in general. So the first type is a scrape nest, and that's not something you're going to find at Snug Harbor because these are typically made by shorebirds and typically made by beaches. And Snug Harbor is not a beach, unfortunately. We have another type of nest that's not at Snug Harbor. Those are burrow nests. And basically, it's just a hole in the ground. And it is great because it insulates the eggs and it keeps them safe from predators. And we don't have this, unfortunately, which kind of sucks. But we do have cavity nests. These are some of the most common types of nests. And there's a northern flicker in there, which is a common bird in the Northeast. And these guys make their holes in trees. A cavity nest is exactly what it sounds, right? And anything from woodpeckers to parrots to waterfowl, they're all going to make these types of nests. And it's really cool, especially when you keep an eye out for them. It's really exciting to see these. You then have platform nests, and you might see one or two at Snug Harbor, but these are more of the rare types of nests that you would see. The bird, in case you're wondering, the bird in the background is an osprey. And typically they're the ones that make these types of large nests. They're typically shorebirds, and they typically require 5 to 7 feet of space to make this type of long nest, this large nest. Then we have cups nests, which again are fairly common, and they're just what they sound like. They're cup shaped. And there's 3 different types. There's a suspended cup nest, and that's basically one that is supported on all sides, attached on all sides rather. There's one that's supported, and it's supported from below, so it's just on a branch from below. And then adherent nests, which are nests that are attached by sticky substances like saliva or mud. And finally, you have ground nests. You might see these as well, but they're basically cup nests or dome nests that are on the ground. The third topic that we're talking about today are habitats on Staten Island and at Snug Harbor. And these are cool things to know, and I'll explain them in a second. So the first one is a vernal pool. So vernal pools are most likely not going to be at Snug Harbor, but they are fairly common around Staten Island. And basically a vernal pool is a temporary body of water that appears after a snowmelt or a heavy rain, and they are crucial for amphibians, insects, and other living organisms, especially when it comes to breathing. And because these organisms take up the entire area and are concentrating in one area, it's a great food source for a lot of birds. It's also a water source. So there's a lot of benefits of having these, and they attract anything from egrets to ducks to hawks. They attract a lot of backyard birds. So this is a great location to go to if you're looking for birds. We have estuaries, and if this picture looks familiar to you, I'm sure that you know fresh kills. And if you don't, fresh kills used to be a landfill that has been capped or closed and is currently being reverted back into a wetland area. And they have, I believe, 10 estuaries. I can't remember if it was 10 estuaries or 10 platform osprey nests, but they have a lot of both. So basically, estuaries are salt water, are brackish water that lead to salt water. Brackish water is a mix of salt and fresh water, and we have a brackish stream coming up in the presentation. And they're super important for waterfowl and seabirds. And then we have deciduous forests, which are fairly common in Staten Island. I think that all people know what deciduous forests are, even if you don't know the meaning behind them. You know the idea, which basically is a forest that has its leaves change and then fall throughout the season. And it's home to a lot of different bird species. But just like the rest of the ecosystems that we will see today, these are some of the threats that face them. So what is acid rain? Acid rain comes from pollutants, specifically sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide, that enter the atmosphere and have this crazy chemical reaction with substances in the atmosphere. And that chemical change results in them coming down in the form of acid rain and really changing the pH of the soil and water. And you might be saying, well, why is this bad? Well, a change in pH in water may not agree to the ways that these organisms have adapted, right? Organisms adapt over a very long time. And it's very similar as if we go from a room temperature environment to an environment that's over 130 degrees Fahrenheit, right? We aren't adapted, we haven't gotten used to it. So take this into account when you're thinking about how plants and animals adapt. Of course, us getting used to 100 to 130 Fahrenheit heat versus 70 degrees Fahrenheit heat is very different than these trees becoming adjusted over a very long period of time. And that change in pH could be detrimental to the entire ecosystem. Another type of threat that a lot of organisms face is deforestation, and that is the destruction of habitats for an agricultural purpose, so for farming purposes, for building new neighborhoods, so housing purposes, and whatever reasons, a lot of forests are being destroyed. And then introduction of invasive species. There's a massive list of invasive species. Off the top of my head, there's lanternflies, honeybees. We have quakers or monk parakeets that are all over New Jersey, in parts of New York, and in parts of Pennsylvania, and goldfish, and so on. And the introduction of these species basically causes a lot of them to outcompete the native species, killing them off. And, it's not a pleasant thing to see in an ecosystem. And then we have the brackish stream. So brackish, again, is a mix of salt and fresh water. Depending on which equipment you use and which studies you go off of, it varies between 0.5 to 10 ppt or 0.5 and 35 ppt. And ppt, by the way, stands for part per thousand. And it is a part of an estuary, or it makes up estuaries, and it creates a unique habitat for a wide array of animals. So the fourth and final topic are birding tips and birding norms. So the first tip is get a bird feeder or stand next to a bird feeder, okay? Remember that birds are looking for food sources. So having a food source that is a whole buffet for birds, that is where you would want to go, because that's where the birds are going to go. Other food sources and water sources are extremely important. And we have a little American robin here, probably feeding on some berries. And yeah, again, for the same reason that a bird feeder will attract a bird, a tree full of berries or a bush filled with berries, that's also going to attract them. Water sources are extremely important as well, especially during the spring and summer months when it gets fairly warm outside. A lot of birds will congregate around ponds, rivers, streams, and so on. Walking quietly and being patient, those are very difficult, for me at least. And then those are really some of the toughest parts of birding, being patient. So you might end up looking at a tree or staring at a tree rather for close to 10 minutes. So you have to learn patience, and it does come with time, but it's really rewarding to see a bird that you've never seen before, or to see a fledgling jump out its nest for the first time and take flight. It's really great to see all that stuff. And walking quietly is great because not only are you not scaring the birds away by announcing your presence, but you're also allowing apps like Merlin that allow you to record bird like ambient noises with bird noises in them. And it helps you easily identify the birds in that area. So there's a lot of reasons that people should stay quiet when birding. Another one is doing your homework. So we have a lovely picture here of a red-winged blackbird, one of my favorite birds. And these guys live in very wet areas. So things like wetlands and vernal pools. And if you don't do your research about what bird you want to see and end up going to a grassland looking for red-winged blackbirds, you're not going to find them. Or you might, but you will be looking for quite some time. And then look up events. So on the right, you're going to see the Great Backyard Bird Count, which we're going to be taking part in February. And it's a great event because you're sending in more information to a lot of these research organizations. And sometimes you might actually have events like at Snug Harbor, where you have someone who has done this for a little bit, teach you how to bird, which is really, really exciting. And then this is our first norm. So this is a bald eagle nest, and they are not common, although they are here on Staten Island, and they are present in New York. The main message of this is going to be, if you see a bird nest, regardless if it's a rare species, a rare nest, or a very popular species and a popular nest to find, you want to keep it secret, because if you post it on social media, if you tell all your friends and they come down, they might scare off the birds. They might, cause them to leave, and that is impacting your populations. So we want to respect them and keep their privacy in mind. And this is not a beautiful sight. And so this is the last birding norm, which is to leave the habitat like you found it. You don't want to be dumping trash and pollutants in the environment, especially when birds make their nests out of anything, and when birds might think a plastic bag is food. So just keep that in mind. And this might be an area where we might be meeting. It's across the street from the info booth. It's the perennial garden. But birds love green spaces. So whether it's Snug Harbor or any other park, your chances of seeing a bird are best when you go to these areas. So tell your friends about Snug Harbor and visit these birding events yourselves. And with that, that concludes our presentation. If you have any questions, contact engagement@snugharbor.org or visit snugharbor.org. So happy birding, and let us know what you guys find.